Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has signed controversial legislation dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill into law now. The GOP legislation bans instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through the third grade. Republicans argue that parents should broach these subjects with children. Democrats have said the law demonizes LGBTQ+ people by excluding them from classroom lessons. For reaction, we welcome to CP24 Tonight Max Fenning, the president and founder of Prism, a nonprofit organization based in South Florida that provides resources to LGBTQ+ youth, and Debbie Owusu-Akyeeah, executive director at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity. Thank you both for joining us tonight. We certainly appreciate your time. Max, we'll begin with you. Here in Canada, I think a lot of people are in disbelief. They can't believe this bill was passed. South of the border, we've seen protests for weeks now, student walkouts as well. This has happened. This is real. Is it hard for you to wrap your head around that?
I've been in this fight for 2 months. So it's hard to say that it's hard for me to wrap my head around it now, but I think that when it first came out, it was a shock. It was a bit of a reality check.
Debbie, this bill we know impacts teachers. It impacts students. What does it mean to a young person, do you think, to have to hide who they really are and to have to go through something like that?
Yeah, it's I think another reminder of how real bigotry is in societies, whether it's across the border, whether it's here in Canada, and for young people to not be able to see themselves reflected and that being a direct action of decision makers. I think it can be disheartening for a lot of young people to have to hide themselves. There's been a lot of work to, showcase queer and trans people and for us to be affirmed, and for this to happen, it's definitely disheartening, and it can only mean that so many young people are going to feel a lot of impact directly in their mental health and in their own physical well-being.
Yeah, let's talk about that impact now, Max. Critics are warning that this could prevent teachers in schools from helping kids who are struggling, kids who are being bullied or contemplating suicide. These are very serious issues, and they're worried that this is going to lead to more depression, suicide, and self-harm. How worried are you about this?
Very. We know that young people who have affirming spaces in their schools are 23% less likely to have attempted suicide. And those are real numbers. Those are real people and real faces to attach to those numbers. And to see that sort of discard and disregard for those young people is really disheartening.
Debbie, I want to talk about what you think this means for us here at home, because we tend to think these issues are so far away and something like this could never happen here. But the reality is what happens south of the border certainly impacts us here. Are you worried that this legislation could increase stigma around LGBTQ+ issues elsewhere, including here at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to tell people that, Canada is not immune to being subjected to certain hate, and we've seen it. I think we've seen a very coordinated and well-funded backlash against queer and trans people in Canada. And I think seeing this happen south of the border is a reminder of how that could happen here in Canada. And we've seen instances like this before, whether it's attacks on comprehensive sexuality education, whether it's, attacks on queer and trans youth, and specifically trans youth to access to healthcare. It's a reality that this can happen here, and I just hope that people in our communities as well as allies are prepared to fight against this hate that we see in our own societies.
Absolutely. Max, we've heard from Governor Ron DeSantis. He says there's nothing unreasonable here. He said that time and time again, that it's parents, he thinks, who should be talking to their kids about sexual orientation and gender identity. With this new bill, with this new law, parents would be able to sue districts over violations. Teachers would be on very thin ice here. From your perspective, though, what does this come down to? What is this really about?
We know that this is about silencing the LGBT community, and we've seen that through this entire fight. We've seen some very anti-LGBT and very alarmingly anti-LGBT rhetoric from the sponsors of the bill, from any supporters of this bill, politicians and otherwise. And it makes it very, very clear that this is not about parents' rights. We say that politicians can name a bill whatever they want, but that doesn't change what the bill contains. And we know that this is about silencing LGBT people in our schools.
So when you hear some of the messaging coming out of Florida, when you hear Governor Ron DeSantis saying that, quote, we'll make sure that parents can send their kids to school to get an education, not an indoctrination, is that painful for you to hear?
It is, and it's also inaccurate to say that discussing LGBT topics is not an education. Our children in the state of Florida are going to school 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And they're also there to learn how to be people. They're not just there for math and science and reading. We have a character development track in our Sunshine State Standards. We talk about responsible citizenship and all sorts of social aspects and how children engage with their families. And it's not purely sterile, math and science and STEM in our schools. And there's a strong disregard for the fact that we talk about these other things that wouldn't necessarily be considered to fall in line with that vein on our school campuses.
Debbie, the LGBTQ plus community has been fighting so hard for so many years, and the fight continues. Does it feel like Florida is going backwards? What does this mean?
It's a really great question. I don't know much about, the state of Florida going backwards. But what I think it is just a reminder of our societies collectively continuing to repeat itself and repeat history. We've seen this happen before. We've seen, the use of ideology being something that people on the right use to say that, folks who are looking for affirming education are trying to indoctrinate young people. In my opinion, I think this only tells us that our fight as LGBTQ people is not done, regardless of queer marriages being legal, despite the fact that we're seeing so much representation in media of queer and trans folks. We have a lot to fight for, and I think that's what the clear message is here. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from young people and their pushback against what's happening in Florida.
And there has been so much pushback. Max, do you have a message for young gay people in Florida tonight who are struggling to come to terms with this bill?
I want young people to know that this fight is not new, that our community has been through this fight before, and we will be through many fights like this now and in the future, and we've always gotten through them, and we will continue to do so in this moment.
And are you prepared to fight till the very end?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Max Fenning and Debbie Owusu-Akyeeah, thank you so much for this conversation. Much appreciated.